This is Windy City Politics and Law, and welcome back to today's video. And in today's video, I thought, what better video to do immediately after rebranding my channel from Social Science Simplified to Windy City Politics and Law than analyzing the 2023 Chicago Mayoral Election and making a prediction for how the runoff is going to go. And once again, even though I renamed the channel, I'll still be uploading the same unbiased, informative political science content. And I'm going to expand into law content as well. So I'm going to go over some Supreme Court cases. And especially if you're in law school taking law classes, that could be very beneficial. And I'm going to try to do one of those a week and also do some analysis of current Supreme Court cases that could potentially change legal precedent in the United States. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The 2023 Chicago Mayoral Election. So on February 28th, that is 2023, the first round occurred, and incumbent Mayor Lori Lightfoot became the first Chicago mayor in almost 40 years to lose re-election. Not only that, she didn't even make the runoff. So regardless of what the political opinions are on her, that's unprecedented in the city of Chicago as far as politics goes. And the two people who did make the runoff, Paul Vallas, the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools. He's also been the CEO of public schools elsewhere, including in New Orleans, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, I believe, and in Philadelphia. And also Brandon Johnson, who is a Cook County Commissioner from the 1st District of Cook County. So looking at the numbers here, there were other candidates as well, including Chuy Garcia, who's a current U.S. Congressman, Willie Wilson. He's run for mayor several times. He's a community activist, and he's involved in Chicago, involved in the local communities there, as well as several aldermen ran, including Sophia King. She is an alderman from the 4th Ward, Roderick Sawyer, alderman from the 6th Ward, as well as some other candidates. And looking at the results from the first round, including the polling, if you go down to the polling here, the graph of all polls and select polls, I'll show both. All polls had Paul Vallas at about 27.5% and Brandon Johnson at around 20%. Whereas if you go to select polls, it's relatively similar. So looking at the polling data was pretty much spot on for the first round. Paul Vallas got 32%, Brandon Johnson got 21%. So Paul Vallas did outperform the polling a little bit. Same with Brandon Johnson, but neither of them outperformed by over 5 points. So I'll say that the polling data was pretty accurate. And now looking at the polling data for the runoff here, and looking at the endorsements for the runoff. And the interesting thing about the endorsements for the runoff, if you scroll down here and look at Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson, and I have to scroll down to the runoff. Here you go. Danny Davis is a congressman who had endorsed Lori Lightfoot in the first round. And in the second round, he switched his endorsement to Brandon Johnson. Obviously, Lori Lightfoot did not qualify for the runoff, so some of these people who've endorsed candidates who did not qualify for the runoff are going to switch their endorsements to other candidates for the runoff. You saw this happen in 2019. A lot of people who had endorsed Bill Daley in the first round and Jerry Joyce had in turn endorsed Lori Lightfoot in the second round in 2019. Or a lot of people who declined to endorse in the first round, now that they have a choice of two candidates, some might still decline to endorse. Because this is interesting, because you have Brandon Johnson, who's very progressive on the left end of the Democratic Party, and you have Paul Vallas, who is a moderate, so on the right end of the Democratic Party. You don't really have that candidate in the middle, like you could say Lori Lightfoot was in 2019, where she was just this candidate who was in the middle of the Democratic Party, not super liberal, not super moderate, just a generic Democrat. And now you also look and see Jesse White, the former Illinois Secretary of State, endorsed Lightfoot in the first round. Now he has endorsed Paul Vallas for the runoff. And now the one thing I want to focus on here is the polling data for the runoff. And looking at the graph of all polls, Paul Vallas is sitting at around 45% right now, Brandon Johnson at around 32%, and 24% of voters are undecided. And the interesting thing is, this is from 1983 Labs, 2 polls, both of registered voters. Now the thing about polls that include registered voters is that registered voters tend to favor left-leaning candidates because the Democrats have more registered voters than the Republicans. And now, granted, both candidates in this election are Democrats, but once again, the registered voters are going to favor the candidate who leans more to the left versus likely voters, like you see here in the Victory Research Lab, which has a BC rating from 538. Which included likely voters, which put Paul Vallas at 46% with only 21% undecided. So likely voters are going to favor Paul Vallas. Registered voters are going to favor Brandon Johnson. And that's a trend we've seen throughout the past decade generally, is that registered voters tend to favor the more progressive or the more left-leaning candidate in any election. And likely voters tend to favor the more moderate or a candidate who is further on the right than registered voters. And once again, you see registered voters favoring Brandon Johnson in the Mason-Dixon poll, sponsored by Telemundo Chicago and BC5. Once again, you see a BC rating from 538. And now the thing about this is, given the results from the first round, I trust the polling data. 1, the polling data seems pretty accurate. And 2, we have to expect both Vallas and Brandon Johnson to outperform where they're at now, and that's obviously going to be the case because there's only 2 options. So I expect Paul Vallas to win, and that's my official forecast. I expect Paul Vallas to win, and I believe he wins 53% to 47% for Brandon Johnson. And the reason I say that is Paul Vallas only needs to pick up 7% of the vote here. So about a third of the undecided vote, according to the polls, whereas Brandon Johnson needs 2/3. And looking at the way that's going to be broken down is, if you take Lightfoot's support and divide it in 2, and you add Willie Wilson's support and Roderick Sawyer's support to Paul Vallas, and he's right around that 50% number, which is what he needs to win. And looking at where he's at right now, 43.52, 44, 46, 38. Now, granted, 38 was at the end of January, and that's right before he started to climb in the polls. And I expect Paul Vallas to win, and I expect it to be close. I expect it to be 53-47, like I've said before. And I expect the majority of the undecideds, obviously, to break for Paul Vallas. I expect him to pick up, like I said, about 10% from the undecided, whereas Brandon Johnson picks up the remaining 14%. And if you look at 2019, where in the first round, Lori Lightfoot got 17%, and Toni Preckwinkle got 16%, and in the runoff, Lori Lightfoot got 73%, and Toni Preckwinkle got 26%. Lori Lightfoot swept every single ward, and once again, you can just see that the candidate who leads in the runoff tends to perform. The candidate who leads in the first round tends to perform better in the runoff, especially since turnout's going down. You look at that. So a lot of the minor candidates, their supporters might not turn out. And there's minor candidates who were both to the right of Vallas, arguably, and to the left of Johnson. So those candidates, or those voters, might not turn out. And looking at the way 2019 went, and if you look at I'm going to try to find the polling data from there. And there were a ton of candidates in 2019 as well, including Paul Vallis, who only got 5% of the vote. And looking at this, there's no polling data. Oh, there is polling data. Bill Daley, Lori Lightfoot, Tony Preckwinkle. The polling data in 2019 was pretty accurate as well. If you look at it in the first round and in the runoff, that polling data was very accurate. And once again, the candidate who led in the first round, the polling data severely underestimated them in the second round. However, given the fact that Lori Lightfoot overperformed the polling data by 3 in the first round and by 20 in the second round, I believe that's a little extreme for 2023. I don't believe Vallis will outperform the polling data by 20 points. Like I said, I believe this is going to be very close, very contested. 53% for Vallis, 47% for Johnson. But at the end of the day, I believe Vallis will end up winning the election and becoming the next mayor of Chicago. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Please remember to hit the like and subscribe button and stay tuned for more great content.